Hello, everybody. Greetings and salutations. After its deliciously restful 4-week hiatus, the daily fantasy sports roundtable brought to you by FantasyLabs has returned. Is this going to be a one-time thing? I don't know, like hooking up with your ex about 1 month after you break up? I don't know. Who knows? But in this show, the 15th episode, we are here. We're going to talk about baseball, the season that has been so far, and what might be as we progress into the summer. I'm your host, Matthew Freedman, editor-in-chief of FantasyLabs. Let's get started. Joining us for his roundtable debut is Adam Pfeifer on Twitter at @apfeifer24. He's a writer for Project Roto and DFS Bootcamp and host of The Process. Adam, thank you for joining the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. It was funny. We're supposed to record during the game 3 of the finals, and everybody kind of was around 8 o'clock, and everybody's like, the finals are tonight. And then we kind of were like, yeah, and it turns out we probably could have recorded it because it wasn't a very entertaining game. But no, I'm glad to be on here.
Yeah, and it's been a long time coming for us to get this episode. And speaking of, it's been a long time coming. Returning to the show is John Daigle at @JDaigle. He's a DFS writer for FantasyLabs. John, thank you for taking time out of your busy Colorado hiking, rock climbing, schedule annihilating day.
Yeah, so my buddy or his partner, whichever one, just once decided a few years ago that it would be a good idea to have their wedding on Super Bowl weekend. And if I was the friend, a good friend, that complained about it that weekend, just imagine last night when Freedman sent on the email saying we got to record during Game 3 of the finals. That wasn't happening.
I mean, is this a sports website? I don't know. I don't watch sports. I just edit articles about sports. I don't know. Anyway, good to have you back on the show, John. And then finally on the roundtable, we have the guy who needs no introduction because he's been on the show as often as I have. That is Peter Jennings at CSURAM88. He's a co-founder of FantasyLabs, an ESPN contributor, a DraftKings analyst, and a man who is about to get hitched. Peter, what is it like to be a dead man walking?
Man, I'm excited, actually. Things are going really well, and there's a correlation with me coming off my injury, walking well, and the wedding date. So that's an extra bonus, and it'll be a lot of fun. And Adam, thanks for joining us, man. I am a huge Kyrie supporter. I'm ongoing this series, but I love Kyrie. I even had the hot take, I think like 2 years ago, that or maybe a year and a half, whenever, I think it was like a year and a half ago when I said this, that Kyrie Irving's the best offensive player that LeBron's ever played with. So I love me some Kyrie. It's devastating when I'm a Kyrie fan, but rooting for Golden State. But thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, it was funny because I co-hosted the Process podcast with CJ Kallenbach, the Siege, and dude just has this notion that Kyrie Irving is not just like not good, but literally bad at basketball.
He said Isaiah Thomas is better, which is the biggest joke I've ever heard in my life.
And that's not even the first time I've seen that. Like Nick from B-Ball Breakdown, he's that dude. Like, I don't know if you know his channel, but he knows his basketball, and he made a whole video about it like 2 years ago. And I don't know. I just watched last night what he did to Steph and Clay, and that's kind of all I needed to know.
And FYI, I'm not going to start a fight with you. This hat is being worn simply because Jay and I from the NBA team had visited Justin to go to a Warriors game for a week. And like the very first 3 hours that we were there were the only 3 hours the sun was out, which led to my head, which is bald, just being entirely too burnt to walk out in public. So we went to the team shop next, and I spent $40 on a hat, and I don't wear hats. So I'm going to wear this hat whenever the hell I can from now on, just to get my money's worth.
It's too bad that there's only one place to buy hats in all of that area.
Listen, I don't need you talking back, Freeman. You just go edit an article.
All right, let's jump into it. A couple of months ago, we had an early season MLB show. We looked at the small amount of data that we had, and we conjectured, we theorized about some trends, but now we're really at that point of the season where we have sufficient data to make some predictive statements. So let's go ahead and start doing that. And Adam, let's start with you. Not quite a third of the season has been played, but we're getting close to it. Right now, how important are last year's stats, and what is the time frame that you find most useful for analyzing baseball players?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the player, right? If you're looking at like a Miguel Cabrera or David Ortiz, one of these guys that have just been around forever. I feel like you obviously would rather look at the previous couple years rather than the entire career, because things obviously changed, situations change, injuries, stuff like that. So what I kind of like to do is I look at last year's stats for, some of the older players, and then I also look at when I'm doing research and writing, you can go on, if you click on somebody's like ESPN player profile, you can sort it just over a 3-year sample. So I find myself doing that a lot. But really when it comes down to it, I really do think a lot of it depends on the type of player it is.
Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty true for the most part. I think that it's easy to have a recency bias with certain guys, but we are getting farther into the season now, so you can trust the stats a little bit more. But I do think the biggest opportunity with past stats and recent stats is identifying guys who may be getting unlucky to start the year, or might have pronounced splits for the last 3 years, but it hasn't shown so far this year, because those things can tend to even out. And we're getting to a pretty nice sample, but it's only a third of the way through the season. So I still think there's value in finding guys who might not be performing up to their last 3 years or last career averages that you can take advantage of. But you definitely don't want to go too far with it. I mean, you do have a pretty good sample. So it just depends. I think you're always trying to find guys who might be getting a little unlucky and trying to target them because their price should be down. And I think you can leverage some of the historical stats for that as well.
Yeah, I think they're important to the point that they still involve using a player's yearly average to date from this current time, but I wouldn't be going back and splitting like the 2015 season to gauge a hitter for this season. Now, say the exception would be like if Ryan Rayburn had a few bad weeks against lefties, Josh Donaldson started struggling against righties. Basically, a hitter starts struggling against the handedness he typically destroys, in which case then I would use like their career statistics or the proper split. And just as a reminder that those struggles really don't matter. It's just like the bigger gauge of information we should use.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, John, are there some metrics right now that you feel as if you can't trust fully, and then maybe other metrics you think are reliable or representative based on the sample that we have right now?
Recent velocity for pitchers is something I'm still toying with the idea of, if only because Fangraphs did a study some time ago about minor differences in the early months of the year. If it's greater than like a 2 miles per difference, better or worse, that might be something we should look into, and it's probably not a good thing, especially if they're 2 miles per hour off what they typically average. But minor differences in the early months don't matter too much because pitchers still have to find their stride or work their arm in or whatever the case might be. And we've already seen that actually with Madison Bumgarner, Jacob deGrom, David Price, and Matt Harvey right now. So it's important to monitor later, but recent velocity, like right now in the early months, I don't think you should worry too much about.
Mm-hmm. And I should also kind of do a plug here to say that on FantasyLabs, Bill Moneghetti, Sheriff Bill, actually posted a 2-part piece on fastball velocity. It was a great piece. People should read it. And it touches on some of the things that John just mentioned right there. Peter.
The best part about that one is that he actually differentiated fastball pitchers in what he decided that actually tends to regress the most. So it's like you said, it's really cool and you should read it.
Yeah, that was going to be the metric that I was going to talk about. But just to add on to the velocity things, I mean, it's one of those things too where the guys are coming into the beginning of the year and they're just not, their arms aren't in the same position physically. I mean, you can do all sorts of stuff throughout the off season, but actually getting into the grind of pitching every 5 days can have a huge impact on these guys, both positively and negatively. You can also look for guys who might come out of the gate throwing a little bit harder than regress towards the end of the year. But I think a lot of times it's going to be the example that John gave, and certainly guys that are studs, like he mentioned, when you see their velocity come back to normal levels, it's a assuring thing. I was nervous about Price off the bat, but we actually had a bug in our models with David Price that were including cutters as well, which was
the models were too good.
The models were the models were yeah. It was giving off a little bit of not the perfect information, but we have that fixed now, and we're always finding different stuff. And I think velocity, both exit velocity for hitters and just pitching velocity, are two stats that are really interesting to look at.
Yeah, definitely something that I was going to bring up too. So I'm glad you guys talked about it. Particularly with a guy like Felix Hernandez, because we saw him kind of tail off a little bit last year, where he wasn't the dominant pitcher we've seen over the past 6-7 years. That's when I really dig into velocity with aging pitchers who are kind of on the decline. And a lot of the times there's a direct correlation between velocity and strikeouts and swinging strike rate, because at the end of the day, that's the big upside in daily fantasy with your pitchers is strikeouts. And so far for Felix, I mean, he's on the DL right now, which obviously isn't a good sign, but his strikeout rate and swing strike rate just way down compared to his career numbers, and obviously the velocity is too on all of his pitches. So I kind of look at it a lot in general, but particularly with guys coming off injury is obviously a huge one, and then kind of aging pitchers as well. So definitely something I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I'm going to ask a question, and any of the three of you guys can answer it. Besides things like velocity, more of those advanced metrics, are there some of the more, I guess, sort of like simple advanced metrics, things like WOBA, ISO, different statistics that a lot of people know about that at this point of the season still seem more reliable than maybe some of the other metrics?
I like batted ball. I like seeing how hard guys are hitting the ball. I talked about in one of my articles last week on Boot Camp where a guy like Joey Votto who's been second in hard hit rate all season long, and he's had I haven't checked what it is now, but like earlier in the week, his BABIP was just like 100 points lower than his career total. So kind of look at guys who are hitting the ball hard and not putting up, like Votto was pretty bad for a lot of this first part of the season, and then it's kind of picked up. And going to cores obviously helped that, but I like looking at guys who are hitting the ball hard because obviously if you hit the ball hard, there's greater success of getting a hit, and kind of seeing like what Pete was mentioning earlier with trying to buy low on guys. Votto was a guy who was really cheap for most of the season just because he hasn't been playing well, and as a result, his getting a little bit unlucky with the BABIP, but he's still been hitting the ball really hard. So that's something I definitely like to look at. I reference it a lot in my articles because it's not exactly like you're clearly because Fangraphs does such a good job. You can clearly see all right, if this guy's making contact and he's making hard contact, then he's probably seeing the ball relatively well, and he'll start getting more hits. So.
Yeah, and I have a trend created actually for our models. It's that high fly ball percentage above average, as well as exit velocity above average. Because obviously, if a guy's hitting the ball hard and high, most likely it's going to be a predictor of a home run. So that seems obvious, but yeah, I think fly ball percentage, exit velocity, and as Adam said, batted ball distance are three things that I'm sure you'll notice, are a common theme in the previews every day.
All right. Well, Pete, do you have anything there?
I know. I think they hit on really good subjects there. I mean, I think that obviously, stats like WOBA are probably going to be a little bit more reliable at this time. ISO is still a great stat in general, but it could be slightly noisier, especially, if you're only using this year's stats. One guy might not have as many at-bats at this point in time versus handedness, and, that could be really skewed by a couple of home runs or something. So I think they're both really important stats. I still use them all the time, but that was just a little tidbit there.
All right. So, Pete, it's June. We are moving out of spring and into summer. How is MLB DFS different than in the summer, different than early season baseball?
Well, it becomes much more of a grind when you get into the middle of the summer. In the beginning of baseball season, you have basketball going on, you have NHL going on, you have people learning baseball. And some people will stick around, but in general, the games will get a little bit more tough just because it's all guys who are really just grinding baseball through the whole year, so they really know it. So you have to pay attention to that. I think the biggest difference is probably in tournaments and adjusting to what strategies are going on. In the beginning of the year, you can play more chalk teams, and you can do a variety of things that you might not be able to get away with at this time of the year just because everyone who's playing, or the majority of people are playing, have a lot more experience this far into the season. So it's something that you should be cognizant of. Definitely be smart about your game selection, and your tournament approach definitely should be different now than it was in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I'm glad Pete took it in terms of the tournaments and strategies, because first of all, there's probably not many people better to answer that. And I kind of looked at this as the weather is kind of an impact too, because starting to get hotter in the summer, and a lot of times the hot weather can really impact, home runs and cutting through. There's all studies about that, and that's kind of what I immediately thought, because that definitely plays an impact when the weather gets warmer. Especially in these relatively good ballparks for power, like Citizens Bank and Arlington. So that's kind of one thing I considered, but yeah, I didn't even think about it in terms of, basketball is winding down, NHL is over, and then people are kind of finding themselves, even if they, haven't even played baseball a lot, waiting for football or something like that, they start playing it a little bit more too. So, that's kind of what I thought the first time I saw this question. I don't even know if that was like a stupid take, but it's kind of the first thing I thought of.
No, that's the weather is actually what I thought of. And I was going to say that we actually tweet about that at the FantasyLabs MLB account, that X team has closed their roof, and a common response is just someone asking, why does that matter? And in the earlier months, it matters, but it's only slight differentials. But for the summer, like obviously balls, the studies you talked about, balls tend to carry farther the more humidity in the air, aka the hotter it is. So like if a team in Texas, Houston, obviously not the Rangers because they don't have a roof, but if the Astros are going to close their roof and hit into an automated cooling system rather than 105-degree summer heat, it's going to matter. And same goes for Miami in the summer, Milwaukee in the summer, etc. So that's what I thought of as well when we talk about getting into the summer months for hitters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would just say it was a fantastic question because I think it could go in a lot of different directions. Yeah. And good job, for me on asking that question.
Great question there.
All right. So for the rest of the show, I want to do something, a little bit of a recent form report. So we entered the season with certain expectations. Some of those expectations have not been met. Some of them have been met, but not really in a convincing manner. So let's talk about what we've seen in the last 2 months and then what that portends for the rest of the season. So let's start by talking about teams in particular. Adam, let's start with you. Who are some of the teams whose performances have surprised you positively or negatively, and what do you think of those teams moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing about, I'm sure many people entering the season picked the Cubs to kind of be the favorite, just because of the stacked lineup and the pitching depth. But I didn't think their pitching would be this good. I mean, they have like 5 guys inside the top 10 almost in ERA. Like their rotation top to bottom has just been ridiculous. So obviously Arrieta is ridiculous, but the other guys there, Hamill, Lester, Lackey, they've been outstanding as well. So I thought that was a little bit surprising. When this podcast was originally kind of brought up, and I looked at this question, the Phillies were kind of, they were playing well, and they're starting to slip a little bit. But another rotation that's been just a bunch of young guys that have been really impressive. Aaron Nola, Velasquez before he got hurt, and we saw they were kind of winning a lot more games than they're supposed to. I really liked watching Odubel Herrera this year. I'm right outside of Philadelphia, and he's just been really just a guy that and even in DFS I play because he just gets on base all the time. I think he's like 30 OPP.
The Greek god of walks.
Yeah, he's last time I checked, he had like 31 walks and 30 strikeouts. He was awesome. I went to a Phillies game. He got on base every single at bat. So the Phillies were kind of a team I did think of at first. They're starting to slip a little bit as expected, but some definite young talent there. So that's been kind of a nice thing to watch as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the Cubs. I wanted to say, though, that the Red Sox right now have got to regress, at some point, right?
Mookie Betts won't because he's the GOAT.
That's for later. I have Mookie Betts for later. Just
good. I got David Ortiz for later. But as the team, let's just talk about the team really quick. They're WAR, the highest of any team currently. I think it's like 5.14. And the Cubs, who have a 5.11, I think it is right now, are slugging 60 points worse than the Red Sox. Like the Red Sox, everything is clicking. Mookie Betts is just killing everything. Chris Young, who's terrible against right-handed pitching, is destroying right-handed pitching. So I would think that it all just, even if they're still the best hitting team in baseball, I don't know if they are, but even if they are at the end of the season, I still think it regresses at some point.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the Red Sox lineup. I think they have the best offense in baseball, but that's an interesting take. I think the teams that are bad, we thought Atlanta was going to be really bad coming into the year, and they have been absolutely terrible. only scored 183 runs on the year, so that's right in line with expectation. We were picking on them to start, continue to pick on them. Team that we knew was going to be bad, but might be worse than anyone expected is the Reds.
Yeah.
That's the most applicable for DFS, especially teams on the road. Playing in Cincinnati, most of the time we'll get a nice park ship, and Cincinnati's bullpen is just atrocious. I mean, their starters are atrocious. They've allowed 359 runs on the season, so those are two teams that are really important to know about in DFS because you can pick on them. You can play pitchers against the Braves, and you can stack against the Reds pretty much every day. So
like last night, for example.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just that's what I'm looking for. The teams are good, like the Cubs. I thought they were going to be really good. Maybe they're slightly above expectation, but everyone's expecting them to be insanely good, and they are. I mean, they have a 149 runs scored to runs allowed differential, which is just unreal. Way higher than I think the next highest in baseball is like 70 or something like that, which might actually be the Red Sox. They've scored so many runs. So I think that you can look at the good teams. There's not as much stuff to do with them in DFS because the good teams like the Cubs, all their hitters are expensive. Pitchers like Arrieta are expensive, and a lot of times it's hard to do something applicable with it. But the really bad teams that you can pick on, that's where you get the most daily fantasy value. Targeting pitchers versus the Braves, taking hitters versus the Reds.
Yeah, one more thing I forgot to mention looking here. Last year and pretty much the last 3 years, you just didn't want to throw pitchers out there against the Royals, and that really hasn't been the case this year. They're still hovering around 500, and they're playing a little bit better as of late, but they really haven't been that dangerous lineup that just they're striking out more. I think the Angels are still way ahead of anybody in terms of strikeout rate. They don't strike out a lot, but the Royals really haven't been that team that you really had to be afraid to throw pitchers against, which has been kind of interesting this year.
I think the opposite of the Padres against lefties are interesting. Like, their splits against righties is terrible, but they're actually not a bad hitting team against lefties. It's really strange.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the teams that are basically meeting expectations, but we could see the possibility for how they might deviate further into the season. John, who are some of those teams?
I don't think – it's going to sound crazy, I know, but I don't think the Rockies have come even close to their potential yet. It's easy to say they'll get better simply because the Colorado summer is coming along, but between Carlos –
They're going to get worse. What are you talking about? Every time, their April record in the last 5 years ago, and then they just suck every summer.
But literally nothing has clicked entirely for them yet. Like, Carlos Gonzalez was so awful the first month and a half until he's hit that recent 6-game run. Trevor Story forgot how to swing the bat after the first week of the season. He's slowly grinding out bases now when they moved him to the end of the lineup. But the home runs, you still have to pick your spot for him. And plus, they've been dealing with all those injuries. I really think I know you, as a Rockies fan, Pete, you know this more than me, but I think for DFS-wise anyways, I think the offense is going to roll around even more than we think towards the later months.
I feel like John just said that just to troll Pete.
Are you sure? What didn't Cargo? I'll have to look up Cargo in a second. But he had a decent stretch for there, and then he got real cold. He's just streaky like that every year.
Absolutely.
He's hot, and then he gets really cold. And when he's hot, it's like no one can stop him. He's hitting home runs left and right. When he's cold, he's swinging at everything and striking out every at bat.
There was a good 3 to 4 week stretch there where his batted ball distance wasn't over 190 feet. He was terrible.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that's an interesting call for sure on the Rockies. I think there's a variety of teams that are playing somewhat well. I think the Phillies, I was going to kind of use an example. I guess they're not meeting expectations, though we thought they were going to be worse. And I don't know what I think about them going forward. It's tough. This is a tough question for me to figure out which teams are meeting expectations that are going to deviate a lot. I think that there's a lot of teams that are playing 500 ball that I could easily see dipping, like the Marlins. I think they might struggle a little bit down the stretch. I don't really believe outside of Jose Fernandez that they're going to pitch incredibly well down the stretch, but it's tough because I don't have a great pick where there's data to back it up. I think it's more about finding those spots where, we know this team's bad and they're starting to show that they're really, really bad and you can continue to pick on them. I thought the Royals example, too, was really applicable for DFS.
Yeah, really just in terms of this season for just regular real-life baseball, I'm just kind of excited to see the NL Central to see if, the Cubs they're ahead of the pack. They're 41-17, but like Pittsburgh and St. Louis are still two really good teams. And Wainwright starting to pitch well. So Pittsburgh 32-28, St. Louis 31-28. I'm kind of excited to see because like Pittsburgh, we've seen Polanco play really well. We've seen Marte. He's playing well, stealing a lot of bases. Jaso has been solid at the top of the lineup. And they got
Kang. Don't forget Kang.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning. So
Kong, right? Kong? I call him Kang too, John, and then Justin and Jay corrected me.
Is it Kong?
I think
it is Kong, actually.
It is Kong. I said Kang forever. So.
Of course, I'm the first one to mispronounce the name.
No, and McCutcheon's gonna get hot. He did this last year. He started off terrible. All his fantasy owners were like freaking out, and then he's right at 300 and all that stuff. So Pittsburgh, if their pitching can stay strong, I think Pittsburgh will be interesting. I don't know if they're going to catch the Cubs because the Cubs are just so good on every aspect of the game. But that division, I think Pittsburgh and St. Louis are going to be a little bit better than they are right now. I mean, St. Louis, I saw a stat, they've already allowed like 100 home runs this season. It's ridiculous.
All right. Yeah. Well, speaking of home runs allowed this season, let's talk about pitchers. And I think there are a few to mention. And Pete, let's start with you. With pitchers, it's always harder because we haven't seen all that much of them, even though we're almost a third of the way into the season. But who has performed in ways that we didn't anticipate? And then what are your projections for them for the rest of 2016?
Well, the first guy that's just way overperformed expectations, especially when you figure he pitches at Coors Field, is Tyler Chatwood. Definitely a guy you want to really consider taking on the road when the Rockies are away from Coors Field. Pitching incredibly well, has one of the highest WARs of any pitcher. You look at all his stats, they're really solid. It's hard to take him in DFS because half the games he pitches are at Coors, but I think he's a really interesting guy. Gray for the Rockies as well is another guy you could take on the road. He's actually been very unlucky so far, starting to normalize a bit. And the other guy who I think is really the most applicable that I think is really surprised a lot of people is Drew Pomeranz. He's pitching really well in San Diego. Obviously, that's a great park for him now. He's getting strikeouts. I mean, he has 83 Ks in 70 innings, which is incredible. I think he's a guy that I don't know if he'll pitch this well the rest of the year, but certainly someone to take advantage of because he's been dirt cheap in DFS on both sites the majority of the year. So I think he's someone you can take advantage of. We'll see how much longer there's a buying opportunity there, but he's been a surprise so far to me this year.
Yeah, can we talk about Colby frickin' Lewis? Like, he's 5-0 with a 3.20 ERA, but like we've been picking on Colby Lewis for years in DFS, and like the dude's still giving up 11 home runs. He's still a major pitch to contact guy, third in hard hit rate. He's top 12 in fly ball rate. Like, he's still a guy who induces fly balls 50% of the time, and here he is just not getting rocked like he has. So I don't know if you guys believe in what Colby Lewis is talking about. Al kind of mentions it. I used to be a three-legged wildebeest and stuff like that all the time on Twitter. But I don't know what to think with Colby Lewis. Every time I see him, I still target guys against him. But right now, the above the surface numbers look good. I don't know what to make of Colby Lewis, but I'm just gonna take a shot and say he's gonna regress a little bit.
As a lifelong Rangers fan who sees Colby Lewis at the bottom of our models every time he comes up,
every time.
It's coming. That and Martin Perez. It is absolutely coming. I don't know when, but whatever the case, let's hope they sustain for a little bit longer. But I just dropped out of my longtime Dynasty Fantasy Baseball League, and a process I used to apply before the draft, which is something I still do and is probably quite common, is evaluate pitchers by looking at their ERA. And if it's lower than their xFIP, it's like significantly lower, then it's safe to assume, it's not guaranteed, but it's as good a predictor as any, that the pitcher will eventually regress. And who stands out at the top of that right now is actually Jason Hamill, who I think it's over 2.5 right now, his ERA between his xFIP. And also he has a career 4.39 ERA, yet he's pitching a 2.14 ERA this season. Tyler Chatwood was another one, but Pete took that one. And my other one, although I think Hamill's still the biggest one to regress, would be Stephen Wright, although I have no idea on any studies of regression in knuckleball pitchers. I don't even know if that's a thing. So Stephen Wright, as well as he's pitching right now, I'm just going to assume he's going to keep killing it.
Yeah, the great thing about like a knuckleball pitcher regressing is you don't even really think of it in terms of like regression. You just think of it like he's a knuckleballer. He just got rocked the way that they do sometimes.
Do people get more film on him? Yeah, like it's not really something that goes away. It's really strange.
Yeah. Okay, so what about the pitchers who are basically themselves, but they are giving off signs maybe through velocity, things like that, signs that they might break out or break down during the summer? Adam, who do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess Kobe Lewis is definitely a guy I would have brought up there. I'm still expecting him to break down a little bit. It's kind of ridiculous. Helps that the Rangers seem to be scoring a lot of runs whenever he's pitching. So, but, Dallas Keuchel was interesting because he was just brutal to start the season. He's pitching better as of late. It's interesting because he's still inducing an insane amount of ground balls per usual, which is something I look at in terms of pitching for DFS, but 10 home runs allowed. He's starting to strike out a little bit more batters. So, I don't know. I feel like Dallas Keuchel and, couple of games against Texas. He's just notoriously bad against Texas, so I'm kind of in the camp that I think Dallas Keuchel is going to be better than he can't get worse, right? So ERA over 5, but I think Keuchel can turn around a little bit. Like I said, a guy inducing that many ground balls like he does, you look at just his past couple of starts, 12, 14, 13, 15 ground balls. Like I think he's going to bounce back a little bit. So I'm interested to see what Keuchel does because Houston needs them right now. Like they've kind of, we didn't talk about Houston, but many thought they were going to kind of take that next step this year, and they really haven't been as good as many have hoped so far. They're just third in that division. So
I have one pitcher written down, and his name is Dallas Keuchel as well. So I will just quickly add on to what Adam said. And it's just that, as you said, ERA over 5, let me add that his xFIP is 3.3. And he's also, the last 2 seasons, been an elite ground ball pitcher, and his ground ball rate is actually similar to this season. The difference is a fairly higher fly ball rate, which if you're a ground ball pitcher, I believe the studies showed that actually tends to regress. So right now, more home runs are being hit just because obviously his fly ball percentage is higher, but I'm just assuming that gets better over time. I'm not worried about Keuchel.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. Another guy I think will get a little bit better. We talked about the velocity being better recently, and that's David Price. His xFIP is still well over a point lower than his ERA. I think he's a guy who can definitely get stronger. There's a couple other out of the guys who are like high class aces. You talk about Clayton Kershaw. He might even be exceeding there definitely is even exceeding expectations for the scale that he's on. Bumgarner is kind of starting to get back into form. There's some of these aces that I definitely think you can buy low on a bit that are coming around, especially guys who you notice might have like a velocity increase. We mentioned a lot of the guys in the beginning of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. And just to quickly say, every other Thursday we have the KBXE report that comes out by Mitch Block. And some of the guys you mentioned are on that report, especially David Price, who I think has kind of been the headliner of that report for the last 2 installments of the series. So, definitely some good pitchers to mention there. And Kershaw is definitely an interesting guy for lots of reasons. All right, now let's finally talk about batters. Who has overperformed or underperformed expectations? And then what, if anything, does that mean for the future? John, who do you think?
This goes right into the Red Sox spill I did, but I just refuse to believe that a 40-year-old David Ortiz can be this good at baseball right now.
The juice, man. Everyone there, there's some speculation that might still be going on.
It would make sense, right? Because right now he is just absurd. WRC plus is one of those other nifty stats that I think a lot of people tend to look at. And basically it just takes a player's entire box score, walks, strikeouts, doubles, home runs, etc., and creates a number, 100 being average, a single metric to represent that hitter. And right now David Ortiz has a 200 WRC plus, which basically says he's hitting 100% better than his actual ceiling. So I don't know if it's going to be due to injury, but I have to think that with warmer months coming around, there's just no way he can continue slugging 670 plus. It's just insane.
The warmer months, it's going to keep his body nice and loose.
That's going to help him if the ball travels farther. What do you think? Come on.
A 40-year-old, like, keep your body loose? No. Like, I'm 28 and my body's already dying, and it's only like 70 degrees outside. I refuse to believe that.
All right.
I'll stay on the Red Sox theme. I wanted to talk about this guy at some point. I don't know if it exactly fits in this frame, but Mookie Betts is playing absolutely unreal. I thought coming to the year he had a chance to be as good as Mike Trout. So I guess he's right there. Maybe he's meeting my expectations, but still exceeding a lot of people's expectations. I think this is a guy you want to continue to roster in a lot of spots, especially at home. The Red Sox offense, I believe, and I think it's possible they could regress a little bit, but I still think they'll have the best offense in all of baseball, and Betts is the catalyst for them. I mean, talk about a guy with elite power, can steal bases, hits a ton of extra base hits, is going to score a ton of runs, and even get RBIs with that lineup. I think he's someone that you can continue to ride this year, and he's right in that class with Bryce Harper, Mike Trout, any elite outfielder you want to throw out there. I think he's just an absolute stud, and we'll stay there throughout the year.
Yeah, allow me to emphasize that when I say regress, I obviously don't mean the Red Sox are just going to start sucking. Like, it's not that at all. Just to make it clear, it's not Kyrie Irving suddenly in a tough series and playing bad, so he just sucks as a player. No, like the Red Sox just right now are playing absurdly, otherworldly, like an historic offensive team. And so I just think even if it cuts down a little bit, that's going to matter on nights where you should be fading them. But people are thinking, oh, well, their offense has been so good. There are going to be spots like that. That's all. That's all.
Yeah, first of all, me and Pete probably need to get together sometime and just hang out because he loves Kyrie, loves Mookie. Mookie Betts is probably my favorite player in baseball with Andrew McCutchen since like the last 2 years. I literally write in my article on Wednesdays for boot camp, when I get to outfield, I just put a disclaimer and I write play Mookie Betts. I don't care. Like, he's outstanding. It's funny because I think he's even striking out more often because this dude rarely struck out in the minors, and he's striking out more and he's still just doing everything, stealing bases, hitting home runs, scoring runs. So dude is going to be just in my lineups for most of the year whenever he's in a decent spot. One guy kind of starting to get a little bit of buzz lately, and maybe it's just because he's on one of my seasonal teams. Eduardo Nunez of the Twins is like playing really, really well. The Twins don't get a lot of pub, but he's batting .330, 9 home runs. He's got 12 steals. He's obviously going to regress a little bit, but I think right now only Machado has a higher OPS among shortstops. So in a position where it's relatively shallow on most nights, Nunez has been really, really a guy I've been looking at a lot and kind of been really into him lately. I'm interested to see, if he's 28, 29. So kind of like that 27, 28 year ranges when hitters hit their prime usually in baseball. So I'm kind of interested to see if he kind of tails off completely or just regresses a little bit or barely regresses, and we just have a really good player that we haven't seen in a while. Dude is making contact about 85% of the time. So definitely a guy that caught my eye in terms of somebody that's been not meeting expectations, but a guy that's just been kind of a nice surprise.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about the Red Sox just a little bit, it's really easy to like a guy named Mookie. I mean, if he had a name that was slightly less cool, would people be as excited about him? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
what if his name? What if we just changed one letter? Like, if it was Doogie Metz, would you still roster him?
Yeah, I would roster him more.
You're right. Actually, I probably would.
No, but like I was at a so it was like 3 years ago, probably 3 years ago. I was at a Trenton Thunder game, and I don't remember the minor league team he was on. He starts. The announcer goes, now batting Mookie Betts, and I never heard of this guy. Thought it was the craziest name. Pretty sure the guy hit in his first 4 bats triple, double, single, stole base, made a diving catch the next inning, and I was like, this guy can play. And the next year when the Red Sox called him up, I literally drafted him in like the 3rd round of my fantasy league and been in love with him ever since. So he's good.
Right. So kind of final question here on the players. Which batters are at their expectations, roughly speaking, but could experience a change from here? Peter, who do you think?
It's already starting to happen with Matt Carpenter. He's a guy that I really like. And if you go back, I mean, in the end of May, he's batting like 240. He's gone on an absolute tear to get up to a 280 average, which is right around. He's like a 290 hitter lifetime, I think. he's a guy that's going to, I think, continue to do well as we get into the warmer part of the year. I really like Matt Carpenter. I think that they have a lineup now that can protect really well against lefties. So Carpenter's a guy that I think is probably right around expectations now, but I expect him to have a great final 2/3 of the season. I think that offense definitely has a lot of potential down the stretch.
Mm-hmm. All right,
Yeah.
Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, Carpenter was a guy I had written down too. And it's a lot of the players I looked at, it's just from looking at some of my teams that I've had, and Carpenter is still hitting the ball really hard. So that's something I always look at in terms of trends. And again, he hasn't been exactly expectations, but I do expect Joey Votto to be a lot better. Like I said, the hard hit rate is something, and this dude obviously, like, I think he swings at like just 15% of pitches outside the strike zone. He's always been like probably the most patient hitter in the league. So when you have a guy who doesn't strike out, who doesn't swing at bad pitches, and when he makes contact, is hitting it hard, the BABIP's going to go up and the numbers are going to go up. Even though the Reds, I agree with Pete, they're kind of a team we can target against, especially with pitching. But Votto is a guy I think is going to start to, not get to, Anthony Rizzo or Paul Goldschmidt type level, but still be a very, very serviceable player. And it's going to be interesting with him because in first base, when you're playing in DFS, it's so deep that nobody's really going to be like extremely highly owned like Votto. Votto won't be extremely highly owned like other guys might. So
there's that one scene in The Office where before Michael Scott quits, he shakes David Wallace's hand and says, "You have no idea just how high I can fly." And I feel like that's what Giancarlo Stanton is telling us right now every time we roster him and hate him for having an over 4 night. He's never had a strikeout rate above 34% or above 30% in any season. And right now, this season, he's at 34%, even though he's still averaging a far batted ball distance and hard exit velocity. So once that finally starts coming around, he's had injuries, So once he gets healthy as well, I think he has just one of those terrifying runs in him that he just destroys opposing pitchers.
like a 12 home run month, something like that.
Something, multi-home run games are absolutely coming, yes.
Yeah. There's no doubt.
Pete, you're on mute.
Sorry, guys. Here there. Trying to be nice while I type there, but I love the Stanton calls. I was trying to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I liked it better when you were on mute.
I was crushing it on mute there, but yeah. I guess that's a nice transition too for like the end. I think that right now and this point in the season is really identifying those buy low points. I mean, we hit on a lot of things, teams you want to pick on, players that you want to target that we think are going to continue to do well, players that you can buy low on. I think really evaluating your process is a key right now as well. So it's definitely a tough time in DFS. We're kind of in the dog days of summer. There's really only baseball and golf going on as primary sports, and definitely have to work hard to grind it out. So I think identifying those buy low guys especially is really critical, because a lot of times they're great tournament plays because they're lower owned. People have such a high recency bias that there's a lot of opportunity in identifying those spots where you expect someone to break out of what's going on. So that'd be my final bit of advice. What do you guys think?
To that point, I do want to say that, yes, salaries drop just because of recent results. However, like you have the advanced stats. We have our models at FantasyLabs, or someone like Curtis Granderson, for instance. I think his batted ball distance was just tonight. He's averaging over 240 feet the last 15 games. He just hasn't had the results. So don't worry about results at all. If someone's just hitting the ball hard and far and his salary is dropping because the results aren't coming, just roster him. That's what makes them great tournament plays.
Yeah, I hate to keep mentioning, but that's what I've done with Votto half the season. And I'm glad Pete mentioned buy low, because that's probably one of my favorite things to do in any form of fantasy. But I think people kind of have it as, at least the last couple of years, it's kind of like more of a seasonal type of trading someone buy low type of scenario. But in DFS, it can be such a profitable thing, because you play a guy, and people have been trying to do it with Giancarlo Stanton, I'm sure, recently, but dude's struggling, breaks out of the slump like in a blink of an eye in baseball, and then all of a sudden they're starting to rake. And if you get that time right, if you look at the metrics that kind of point to him, breaking out of that slump, and you're on it, and he has 4 for 4 game, 2 home runs, 6 RBI, something like that, and then you're golden. So that's something I definitely tend to do most nights that I'm playing.
All right, guys, good stuff. Thank you for being on the show. We've been speaking with Adam Pfeifer, John Daigle, and Peter Jennings. You can follow them on Twitter at apfeifer24, not jdaigle, and CSURam88. And you can follow me on Twitter at MattFTheOracle. I'm Matthew Freedman, and this has been the Daily Fantasy Sports Roundtable brought to you by FantasyLabs. Thanks for tuning in.